Okay, 3-120. Clifford is making a really big white cake for his sister's birthday. The recipe calls for 1 5/10 times as much flour as sugar. It also calls for 1/2 as much butter as sugar. All the butter, flour, and sugar together total 7.5 or 7 5/10 cups. How much butter, sugar, and flour does Clifford need? Write and solve an equation. Remember to define your variable and to state your answer in a sentence. Okay, for 120, we're starting to kind of relax on the 5D process, so we're not going to ask you guys to show your steps as far as the trials, but we do need to make sure that we're able to write and solve an equation. Now, a lot of you guys are trying to do your work and kind of just work through it and just write a lot of scribble throughout your paper, but please make sure you guys make an effort to write an equation and solve an equation. It seems like it's additional work, but it does make your lives a lot easier. So how do we do an equation? Well, we know when we have an equation, we need to start with the let statement and we need to define the variable. So we're just going to use x, so let's go ahead and say let x represent or equal. Okay, if we notice the recipe is comparing flour with sugar, it also compares the butter with sugar. So I think we could, I think it'll be safe if we let x represent the number of sugar or the cups of sugar. Okay, so if we know x is going to represent the cups of sugar, we know that since the recipe calls for 1.5 times as much flour as sugar, that is going to mean that the flour will represent 1.5 times, so 1 5/10 times the amount of sugar. And instead of writing sugar, we're going to represent with x, so 1.5 times x. We also know that it only needs half as much butter as sugar. So how do I represent half as much? So we just write 1/2 times x. Okay. So we have the sugar, flour, and butter. Okay, so it's really important we start by defining the variable. Then we could go ahead and make an equation from this. Well, we know now that the total together is 7.5 cups. So if we add together the sugar, the flour, and the butter, all three items, we'll have a total of 7.5 cups of ingredients. So I think for the equation, we're going to go ahead and add the sugar. We're going to go ahead and add the flour. And we're going to go ahead and add the butter. Okay, so this is the sugar. And let's go ahead and show that sugar. This is going to be the flour, and this is going to be the butter. Okay, we know that all of that combined is going to equal 7 5/10 or 7.5 cups. Okay, well now to figure this out, we could actually just go ahead and solve the equation. Once we find the sugar, we could figure out how much flour there is and how much butter there is. We can use the 5D process if you guys want. This is really the you know, what I highlighted was kind of the description. We could draw a diagram as well. These are the defining the variables. The do is this part where we add it together and decide as if it's 7.5 and do trial and error. But we're kind of past that point. Now we have an equation. We know how to solve an equation now. So what we'll do is, if you guys notice, we could go ahead and combine the like terms, and all three terms here are like terms. So we have 1x plus 1.5x, making 2.5x, plus another half x, which makes a total of 3x equals 7.5. Okay, now we need to just go ahead and get rid of the 3, and to do that, we're going to divide both sides by 3. Okay, once we do that, I know 7.5 divided by 3, 7.5 divided by 3 is 2.5. 2.5 plus 2.5 is 5, plus 2.5 is 7.5. Okay, so we know what x is, but we're not done. We're almost there, but we're not done. Let's go ahead and state our answer in a sentence, and we have to answer how much butter, sugar, and flour does Clifford need. So we know that he needs 2.5 cups of sugar. He needs, because x is how much sugar, he needs 1.5 times, so 1.5 times 2.5, 2 and 5/10 times 1 and 5/10, 5, 2, 10, 12, 25. So we need 3 and 3/4 or 75/100 cups of flour, sugar, flour, and we need half of the amount of sugar, so half of 2.5. I already know it's 1 and 25/100, so 1 and 1/4 cups of butter. Okay, so let's write the sentence. Clifford needs 2.5 cups of sugar, 3 and 3/4 or 3 and 75/100 cups of flour, and 1 and 1/4 or 1 and 25/100 cups of butter.